to sift through what it all means. We're joined now by CTV News Chief Political Correspondent Vassy Kapelos. Another big day out there. And Vassy, what is your sense in talking to politicians and analysts all day? Spared the worst, but still very much in fight mode?
Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to describe it, Patricia, as Doug Ford and Kimberly referenced, like the best of a bad deal, because we escaped miraculously, it felt like, as those lists were coming out yesterday at this time. We all were looking for where is Canada on it, because there wasn't even a world in which we could imagine that Canada would not be on that list, given our treatment since January 20th. But in fact, we were not, neither was Mexico. And so we escaped this brand new global trade war. But we have, in a sense, been embroiled in our own trade war, launched by Donald Trump now for the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so, right? And what that means is, despite the fact that we don't have reciprocal tariffs on us, even tonight, moments ago on Air Force One, he was talking about pharmaceuticals and other sectors. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, had mentioned lumber among them, and the chip industry, the microchip industry, and agriculture, all of which could greatly impact Canada, in addition to the ones on steel and aluminum and on cars now that are in effect as of today. So we are certainly not emerging from this unscathed. In fact, there is going to be big impacts in the immediate and medium-term future, but it's just that we didn't get hit as hard as everyone else yesterday.
Yeah, in terms of some of those impacts, if you're feeling any relief and you take a look at your investments today, that goes away pretty quickly. Just a meltdown on the markets.
A complete meltdown. Like, we're talking the worst day for losses since 2020 during the COVID economic shock, which was almost like an instantaneous recession. I'm sure we all remember all too clearly at this point. The markets have lost $3 trillion in the United States since Donald Trump was inaugurated. And what's fascinating about this is that you would have assumed, given his behavior and what he responded to in his first term, that market losses like what happened today would be something that moves him, right? That essentially moves him from the position that he has already stated, that makes him retreat from this idea that tariffs are all of a sudden going to restructure the world economy in the United States' favor, or even more, I should say, in the United States' favor. But it hasn't. On Air Force One, he was doubling down, like I said, talking about additional tariffs and bragging that countries had called him in response to the imposition of the tariffs that he announced last night. So, in fact, he seems to be doing the opposite of what we would have assumed his behavior to be based on the patterns he established a number of years ago, which I think makes all of this all the more unpredictable for Canada and Canadians.
The immediate impact on the auto industry as well. And it's a question I've heard you often put to politicians on your show. Will any money that comes in from countermeasures, counter tariffs, go to those people affected? Carney did address that today in pledging the counter tariff on automobiles.
Yeah, and I spoke to the Minister for Industry, also a Liberal candidate during the campaign, but in this capacity as a minister in charge of the auto sector, essentially about what that actually means, because they're estimating that they'll get about $8 billion of revenue from the counter tariffs, as they've described they will be imposed, and that they'll put all of that to workers and the industry. I asked, through what mechanism, how much of it? There's really not a lot of detail. I'm going to be straight here. I didn't get very many answers. There's the idea that it might be able to buttress EI if, in fact, the need exceeds the capacity of the system right now, if we get to that point. I think the bigger question is, how far is the government prepared to go to help the industry? And will it involve, handouts kind of, or money to get them through a difficult time? Or will it involve loans? Anita Anand, the Minister for Industry, told me that loans weren't really being discussed, but that they were prepared to help the industry in sort of, and I'm paraphrasing, but whatever capacity they can in order to keep it alive. The thing is, if plants start shutting down, even more so than the one that did for 2 weeks or announced one for 2 weeks, or if the job losses, mount, the type of help that will be necessary to keep this integral sector of our economy going is not going to come cheap. And so I think that is something really to keep our eyes on moving forward.
We don't have time to talk about it, but growing opposition south of the border, some Republicans looking at joining the Democrats in some opposition. We're also seeing an interesting situation play out with Canadian unity and Preston Manning weighing in today on all of that. Lots for you to talk about on your podcast for sure tomorrow, Vassy. Thanks so much for this.